welcome everybody, and we can get started. If I guess all you really need is Hanisim, and even that, I don't know how much you'll need exactly. Okay. I mentioned, obviously, we'll get back to Birchat HaShachar, please God, either next week or in 2 weeks, but obviously with Hanukkah around the corner, and since it's part of our Siddur, so we figure we'll discuss Hanisim. So the first thing to notice, of course, Hanisim ala Purkan ala Gurat, is the comparison between Hanukkah and Purim. We know that we say Hanisim on Hanukkah and Purim. On the other holidays, sort of on the biblical holidays, we say, Yalla v'Yavo. On Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh Chodesh, which we'll discuss soon, is a biblical holiday. So on those holidays, you say Yalla v'Yavo, and you say the holidays and you say Yalla v'Yavo in Ritzeh. You say it in an earlier blessing. Hanukkah and Purim, we say Al Hanisim. So right away, we have the distinction between the biblical and the rabbinic holidays. Now, this comparison between Hanukkah and Purim goes so far. It's famously, we always associate them together, but it's most fascinating in the Rambam. The Rambam, who of course, explained all of Jewish law, and he was the master organizer. The Rambam, not forget what he wrote. What he wrote is more important than how he wrote it, but his style is just, astounding. How he put together his literary style, his organizational style, his drawing of sources. So when he comes to Hilchot Chanukah and Purim, it's always very fascinating how he sets up halachot. So he puts Hilchot Megillah and Chanukah are together. In other words, there's no separate Hilchot Chanukah. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch, there's the laws of Purim and the laws of Hanukkah. So first of all, it's interesting, the Rambam doesn't call it Purim. He doesn't call it the laws of Purim, he calls it the laws of Megillah, which is kind of interesting because Megillah is only one of the aspects of Purim. Maybe it's the main aspect, but it's not the only aspect. So that's interesting. He calls Purim, he calls Megillah and Hilchot Chanukah. So the first two chapters are Hilchot Chanukah, are Hilchot Purim or Hilchot Megillah, and chapters 3 and 4 are Hilchot Chanukah. Like you have another fascinating example. The Rambam, unlike all of us, the Rambam, we always associate Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? Obviously, this beginning of the Seir Timei Tshuva, Rosh Hashanah, where Rosh Hashanah Yikatevu b'Yom Som Kippur Yikatemu. The process starts on Rosh Hashanah, continues on Yom Kippur. But the Rambam puts together Hilchot Shofar, Lulav, and Sukkah. And he puts Yom Kippur as a separate section. So the Rambam wants to connect the shofar and the lulav. In other words, the shofar is how we cry out to God it's prayer without words, and the lulav is how we celebrate. We pray, we come to God, in song. And both of them are taken in tefillah. We blow shofar in the Shemona Esrei, and we take the lulav in Hallel. And he puts Yom Kippur separate. It's just to study how the Rambam organizes his halachot is a fascinating subject. Anyway, so we have Al Hanisim, we've got Hanukkah and Purim together. Why? And the phraseology is very different, Al Hanisim. So this gets to the concept I'm sure many have heard of, that Hanukkah and Purim, unlike Pesach and Shavuot or Rosh Hashanah, have this notion of Pirsume Nisa, basically PR. You have to publicize the miracle. That's why Lubavitch goes around on the Hanukkah, lighting Hanukkah candles with the mayor and City Hall everywhere they can in their trucks, because there's a notion of Pirsume Nisa. You have to publicize the miracle. And because we have to publicize the miracle, Hanukkah has a very strange halacha that you have to sell the shirt off your back to buy oil or candle, whatever, to light the menorah. That's very unusual because normally the halach is you don't have to. Not only don't have to, you're not allowed to. It's forbidden to spend more than 20% of your income on any mitzvah. The Torah doesn't want you to become poor to do a mitzvah. If a lulav costs $100 and you're on welfare, or not, whatever, you have no money, you live mamash paycheck to paycheck, you're not allowed to buy a lulav. You can maybe bore a lulav, but let's say you're stuck in the house, it's COVID, you can't bore a lulav. Okay, so you don't have a lulav, no big deal. Torah doesn't allow you to take a lulav. So the exception is whenever you have the mitzvah of Pirsume Nisa, you have to publicize it. So then we make an exception, and you have to, as the Gemara says, you have to sell the shirt off your back in order to light the Hanukkah candles. Now you have to realize how poor somebody has to be not to be able to afford to light Hanukkah candles. So it could be, I don't know, 2,000 years ago, whatever, it was more expensive, but still you have to be pretty amazing poor. So that's the notion of Persume Nisa. You have to publicize the miracle. Why don't you have to publicize, Pesach and Rosh Hashanah? Well, why is there no mitzvah of publicizing the miracle by, let's say, Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? So I don't know for sure, but I would think, unless somebody wants to, to chime in, I would think it's because they're publicized. The Bible was a very public book. The Bible is, the world's bestseller, and the Muslims accept the Bible in some form for sure, and the Christians even more so. So you don't have to publicize. This is written in the Torah. Things that came later in Jewish history. Oh, that God continues his relationship with the Jewish people, especially Hanukkah, that has no text, unlike Purim that does have a text, the Megillah. So therefore, there became a special mitzvah of Persume Nisa, that you have only on rabbinic holidays and not on biblical holidays. The only other place that I'm aware that the rabbis invoke this principle of Persume Nisa is on Pesach, but it's not about the matzah or the maror or anything like that, or their Cypriots in Mitzrayim telling the story. It's on the Arba Kosot, the 4 cups of wine, because the 4 cups of wine is a rabbinic mitzvah that has no biblical source at all. So there too, and we know that the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Arba Psachim that deals with the Seder, says afilu ani min hatamchui. That means there were these plates for the poor people. So there was one charity for those who had enough food for 1 week, but that's it. Beyond the week, they didn't have what to eat. So they could take from one charity. That's a kupa. Then you had a tamchui. The tamchui was people, they were so poor, they didn't have the next 2 meals to eat. So even somebody who was so poor, he has to go through the garbage and he has to, who knows what, to get food. It's really sad, really, really sad. Even that person has to be given 4 cups of wine. It's the same idea. Yeah, now he can't sell his shirt off the back to get wine. He doesn't have one, and wine's too expensive. 4 cups of wine. I mean, the community. Normally, the community say we have other needs, and we're not going to give. You don't have to have 4 cups of wine. You can have 1 cup of wine. You have no cups of wine. So that's the other aspect of pursuing Nisa. Okay, now so that's just obviously, and the word al Hanisim. That's how we begin on the miracles. Now, by the way, you'll notice something interesting. It's okay. We'll come to that later. How the phraseology of the opening paragraph is the same. And then it switches between Hanukkah and Purim. So we'll have to discuss, like, for example, what wars were there on Purim, right? It says we're thanking God for his miracles and salvation and his gvura, his strength, and his Shua is also salvation. Milchamot on the wars that you did by Yemimei Bismanazah. We'll get back to that language, but just to throw out the idea, what war happened? I understand on Hanukkah there was a war. There's no war in Purim. Purim is all about eating and drinking. Okay,
Jay, at the end of the Megillah, they're fighting. There were lots of people killed.
Those words. Okay. All right, I take that. I hear you. So maybe I was just being an idiot and I totally forgot about that war. But it's funny. So now I actually saw that mentioned in one of the commentaries. So now I have to read what. So I wasn't thinking straight, but what was he thinking? Why no worse than Hanukkah? I don't know. I have to come back. Thank you for that. Okay, I take that back unless I have some answer to that. Why Purim did that? But it's true for sure. What you say is true, obviously. But it is a different type of war. In other words, it's a result. It's not the story of Hanukkah is about the war. The story of Purim is not about the war. But okay, I hear you. Thank you very much for that. Like I always say, you learn the most from your students. Okay, thank you. So now, what happens if you forget to say Al Hanisim? It happens all the time. I'm very good at forgetting Yalav Yavo at Mariv. I forget Yalav Yavo and Mariv like 75% of the time. And I forget it at Shacharit like less than 1% of the time. Why? It's how the psychology of the brain. Why is that? Because if you forget at Mariv, Yalav Yavo, you don't have to repeat the Shmon Esrei. And if you forget at Shacharit, you do. So even though I don't consciously want to do that, I don't know if I forget it 75% of the time at Mariv, but it may be close to 50% of the time. It's amazing how often I forget Yalav Yavo. And I usually remember, like in Shalom Rav or Lokainitz, or like I remember often, oh, I forgot Yalav Yavo. No big deal. You don't go back. And at Shavuot, I almost never forget, because psychologically, I don't want to forget. I don't want to repeat the Shmon Esrei. So what happens if you forget Al Hanisim? You have to go back. There's a reason. What do you think? Maybe people here are amazing. They've never forgotten Al Hanisim, so they don't have to deal with this law. But people like me have to deal with this. Anybody? Okay. I don't want to embarrass anybody. So let's take a look at a very interesting Tosefta. The Tosefta. Okay, so as you know, the Tosefta is a parallel text to the Mishnah. Mark Shapiro, of course, Dr. Shapiro's been talking about it a lot, because Shaul Lieberman, that was his major work, Tosefta Kipshuta, to explain the Tosefta. Today, almost, who looks at it? A Tosefta, like a professor at the Hebrew University. Yeshivas, they basically, generally, they ignore the Tosefta, unless it's sometimes quoted in the Gemara, but it's a parallel text, often elucidates, often says more than the Mishnah, and sometimes it disagrees with the Mishnah. And this was written at the same time, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not enter into the Mishnah, but it's very important material. And the source of many things are from the Tosefta. So here, the Tosefta in Brachot says, if you don't mention Mashiv HaRuach and Tchiyat HaMeitim, Sheila B'Brachat HaShanim is V'tein Tal Umatar, you have to return, you have to say the Shmon Esrei. You don't say Havdalah on Saturday night, you don't have to repeat it. Okay, now you have this very, very strange halacha. Kol shein bo musaf. If there's no musaf, like Hanukkah and Purim, why is there no musaf? Because musaf is a biblical idea, obviously. Only if the Torah says you have to bring a sacrifice. The rabbis can't institute an obligatory sacrifice on Hanukkah, which is interesting, by the way. You think maybe they could. Maybe the rabbis could say, this way they institute the halal, they'll institute on the time of the temple. Purim happened either right before or the beginning of the second temple in hundreds of years. Maybe the rabbis could have, but it's actually very interesting that we assume, for reasons that, like I say, are not totally clear, the rabbis don't have the right. They have a generic concept of a korban toda, right? If someone, right, we say bench gomel. So perhaps that parallels bringing a korban. If salvation happens to you personally, you have to bring a korban, but they don't have the right, apparently, to institute a korban musaf, like, 2 parim and an ayil and shiva kvasim and a seir lechatat, that they can't do. So if there's no musaf, post-biblical, Hanukkah and Purim, you have to add me'ein ha'ma'orah b'hodah. You have to add me'ein ha'ma'orah. That's, you have to mention the day. It doesn't say how, but we'll assume that's on Nisim. Bimlo amar, ein machzirim oto. Okay, well, let's see. It's clear what you see already, the bracket, what exactly is the actual text. They do or they don't. But here we assume it's ein machziroto. That get out of b'chol sheyesh bo musaf. Rosh Chodesh, Chol HaMoed. Like I say, Rosh Chodesh is a real biblical holiday. Mipalel. And if you forgot, you have to repeat. So the Mishnah, the Tosefta says, if you forget Al Hanisim, you don't have to repeat the Shmon Esrei. Okay, very nice. Why not? Because there's no musaf. So I read this Tosefta. I said, what in the world is it talking about? What in the world is the connection? We just said there's no, if there's musaf, on Rosh Chodesh, on Chol HaMoed. By the way, Chol HaMoed Mariv, if you forget Yalav, you have to repeat the Shmon Esrei. It's not a halacha in Mariv. It's a halacha in Rosh Chodesh, that the baiting could only sanctify the new moon in the daytime. It's not because Rosh Chodesh Mariv is a reshut, right? That's a beautiful insight of Tosfot. Somebody said, like, no, I don't have to repeat the Shmon Esrei if I forget Yalavio and Mariv, because you don't really have to daven Mariv. As we know, Mariv has a lower status. It's a minhag, it's a reshut. We've accepted upon ourselves, but it's a lower status. We don't repeat the Shmon Esrei. So if you forgot Yalavio, no big deal. That's what a lot of people think, but the Shachrit, that's not why. It's because the court was never allowed to sanctify the new moon at night. They couldn't meet at night. They had to meet in the day. And as Tosfot explains, you don't have to daven Mariv. But if you daven Mariv, you got to do it right. So don't say, I didn't really have to daven Mariv. Say, I forgot Yalav Yavu, big deal. No. If you have to daven Mariv, you got to daven it right. Just so happens Rosh Chodesh and Marv don't go together. It's a beautiful idea. We discussed this with last week, volunteering. Does a woman get more reward for doing a mitzvah because she volunteers? Maybe volunteers gets more reward, right? So that's the thing, I'm volunteering. I don't have to do it so right. So, well, no, if you're going to do it right or don't do it at all. I think that's a very powerful idea. But anyways, that's why on Rosh Chodesh, if you forget Yalav Yavo at night, you don't repeat the Shmona Esrei. But on Chol HaMoed, if you do forget Yalav Yavo, you do repeat the Shmona Esrei. But the Tosefta connects it to Musaf. If it's a day you say Musaf, like Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, you do repeat it. And if the day you don't say Musaf, you don't repeat it. Why? What's the connection to Musaf? Sort of a funny thing. What does Musaf have to do with anything? So I thought very briefly, and then we'll get into Hanisim a little bit more. I thought because Musaf, what's Musaf? Musaf means something in the temple. Rosh Chodesh is, Rav Soloveitchik, you say Rosh Chodesh is a temple holiday. How do we celebrate Rosh Chodesh Day? We don't. Maybe some of the women don't do work. That was the old minhag. The woman of the wall. Why Rosh Chodesh? We all know Rosh Chodesh is a woman's holiday. The moon, the cycle of the moon, corresponds to the bodily cycle of a woman. Clearly, that's the connection between Rosh Chodesh and being a woman's holiday. But Rosh Chodesh has no manifestation outside of the temple. That's why we say half halal. The entire Rosh Chodesh in the temple was, wow, that was like on Pesach. You brought the same sacrifice on Rosh Chodesh as you did on Pesach and on Shavuot. And basically the same one as Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, just an extra or one less par. In other words, on Pesach, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, and Rosh Chodesh, you brought 2 parim, 2 oxen, 1 ayil, 1 ram, and shiva kvasim, and 7 sheep, 7 lambs, and a seir lechatat. And on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shemini Atzeret, it was 1 and 7 instead of 2 1. But Rosh Chodesh was like a real holiday in the temple, very similar to any other yontiv, but it only manifests itself in the temple. So I thought that's perhaps the connection, because we discussed in our first couple of classes, prayer is temple-based. The origins of prayer are from the Beit HaMikdash. The historical origins of prayer from the time of Ezra, the beginning of the Second Temple, in the Mamadot, relating to the Korbanot, the actual prayers actually began in the temple historically, and of course, philosophically, my house, the main purpose of the temple is not to bring sacrifices. Prayer is a much more important concept of the temple. When I'm not talking when the temple's not standing, when the temple is standing. So I thought, so if there's Musaf, prayer is on a higher level. I don't know, I make this up, and maybe you can agree, disagree. If there's a Musaf, the whole day of prayer is different. It's a more serious day of prayer. So fair for you forget Yalav, you forget. There's no Musaf. Okay, yeah, we have that Hanisim, but it's not the same thing. It doesn't have that temple idea to it, even though Hanukkah itself is all about the temple, right? The whole Chanukah Mizbeach. But nonetheless, you don't have to repeat it. Okay, that's just a few words of introduction. Kind of, I found that Tosefta kind of interesting. And if somebody has another explanation what the connection is between repetition on Rosh Chodesh and Hanukkah to Musaf, please feel free to share. Okay, what's the original origins of Al Hanisim, or the concept of Al Hanisim? So let's go back to the famous Gemara on Hanukkah. So I'm sure many people know that there is no Mishnah on Hanukkah, right? People aware of that? Yes or no? You can put up your hand. You don't have to put up your hand. Why that is a fascinating discussion. Why the Mishnah is not mentioned? There's this sort of the academic reasons. I don't know what to call it. Apparently, this was said by the Khatam Sofer. I've mentioned this before, another contact by the Khatam Sofer, but it sounds like, an academic, like a professor. I mean, I don't mean to say it in that way, but you understand, like some professor, said it, but that the Khatam Sofer would say it. I haven't seen it inside, so I have to double check, but this had to do with the machloket, the Rambam and the Ramban. What happened afterwards of Hanukkah, that the Chashmonaim took over the religious leadership, right? We know we have, I always like to call it the separation of church and state in Judaism, synagogue and state. It's not exactly the American model, but the Kohanim work in the temple, and the Shevet Yehuda, as Rabbi Adler was talking about last night, not Yosef, Shevet Yehuda is the king, and the twain shall never meet. You're not allowed to cross. You're not allowed to have a Kohen, right? As we mentioned, Jonathan Sachs says, when you mix religion and politics, you get bad politics and worse religion. So and the Chashmonaim crossed that line, and we know terrible things happened afterwards. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, of course, was a descendant from Shevet Yehuda. Came from the family of the Nisiim who were related to Shevet Yehuda. So some say sort of as he was upset, so he didn't put it in the Mishnah. There are references to Hanukkah because they peripherally come up, but there's no mention about Hanukkah. Others say because there's no Torah Shabbat. Well, whatever the reason is, Hanukkah is not mentioned in the Mishnah. It gets into the Gemara in Shabbos, because the Gemara is talking about what candles you can and can't light on Shabbat. What's the problem? Problem is the purpose of Shabbat candles and the purpose of Hanukkah candles, what we'll see, are diametrically opposites. The purpose of Shabbat candles is to have light. You're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat. No, you weren't going to sit in the dark. Couldn't turn on the electrical lights. You didn't have a Shabbos timer to turn on the sun, back then. So it got dark. It was dark. So you had to light candles. That was the only light you had. So the entire purpose of the candles is to see from it, is to use it. So therefore, there was a fear if the wicks are not so good and the flickers, you're going to play around with the oil, and therefore you can't use it. But with the minhag Ashkenaz to say every Friday night, this you can light, this you can't light. So the Gemara says, what about Hanukkah? What about Hanukkah? Well, that depends. Can you use the light? So there's a whole debate. We all know you're not allowed to use the light, but that other opinions are you can use the light. So if you can use the light, then you wouldn't be allowed to, to use it on Shabbos and weekdays. So there's a whole discussion. And that's how the discussion begins. The discussion begins. I'll share my screen. But what Hanukkah candles can you use? And then the Mishnah, so it's funny. It has a whole discussion. It goes on for a page, like one Tana Rabbanan there, tell you how to light, when we light, all this stuff. And then the Mishnah asks this funny question. Not the Mishnah, the Gemara, my Hanukkah. First of all, what does my Hanukkah mean? That's not so clear. Is it what is Hanukkah or why is Hanukkah? The Safari here, they translate, what is Hanukkah? What is Hanukkah? Is that what they're asking, or they're asking why? So you'll notice already the difference. Adin Steinschutz, I think that's as far as he said, what is Hanukkah? What does Rashi say? My Hanukkah, al Eza Nes Kavua. On what miracle was Hanukkah established? Not what is Hanukkah, why is Hanukkah? Why do we celebrate Hanukkah? So the Gemara says on the 25th of Kislev, there are 8 days, you're not allowed to have eulogies, you're not allowed to fast. When the Greeks entered in the temple, they made all the oils impure. We couldn't use them. And when the Chashmonaim, and they won, they only found, this is the famous story, only pach echad shel shemen, only one thing of oil, and and it was only could light one day, and a miracle happened, and they did it and it lasts for 8 days. Lashana acheret. So that's a very interesting expression that we'll see in a few minutes. Lashana acheret means in another year. Hanukkah didn't happen right away. Why did it happen right away? That's a very good question. We'll have to see. In other words, the rabbis did not establish Hanukkah immediately as a holiday, kind of like Yom Ha'atzmaut, things don't history, when we look back 1,000 years, they're obvious, but when you're living through them and there's no prophets to tell us what to do, God doesn't speak to anybody, I don't know, is this a big deal? We know from the on Purim, the back and forth, the whole 9th chapter is a debate back and forth, and the Gemara elaborates on it, Kavuni L'Dorot, Esther said, make me a holiday, the rabbis say, could jump in the lake. We have enough holidays. We don't need another holiday because another war with Amalek. We're not having a holiday. And back and forth, but the Klovas there. So it wasn't clear. So Hanukkah also did not become a holiday right away. Some say only after the destruction of the temple, which makes a lot of sense. Kavum v'asum yamim tovim. So the Mishnah said, the Gemara says that Hanukkah is a Yom Tov. So Rashi already has to comment. I believe Rashi has to comment because we have a problem. If Hanukkah is a yontif, I don't know. He doesn't say it here. If it's a yontif, why is this Rashi not down here? Then you can't do any work. So I don't know. It's very interesting. This is coming out in English, not in Hebrew. Okay, a yontif. It is not forbidden to work on them. I don't know why this is appearing in English, not in Hebrew, but fine. So Rashi right away says a yontif doesn't mean like Pesach a yontif. It just means a good day, not a yontif, a good day. Forbidden to work, not forbidden, but they were fixed only in regards to reciting Hallel and Elul Nisim. as part of Hodah. So it's very interesting. You have Hallel v'Hodah. Yom Tov, you have Hallel and Hodah. And the way Rashi phrases it is Hallel and Hanisim is part of Hodah. In other words, I don't know, is how I would have learned Hallel is Hallel and Hodah is Hanisim. It's not exactly what Rashi says. Rashi says Hallel and Hanisim is Hodah. In other words, Hallel has a dual function. Hallel is songs. You have to sing songs of praise, and Hodah is thanksgiving. They're not the same thing. I mean, they're songs of praise, but a song is joy. A song is rejoicing. We're happy. We're excited about what happened. That's why we say Hallel. We're re-experiencing the Exodus, right? That's the original Hallel. That's where Hallel comes from. It's David HaMelech wrote the words, or who knows, maybe Moshe wrote some of the words. But the concept of Hallel, that first Hallel was said when they left Mitzrayim. That's why the minhag, that's why we say Hallel to Seder. Some people say Hallel in Shul night. Hallel is a spontaneous reaction to the joy that you feel. Hodah is a more, a reflective. I realize what I experienced, and now I'm going to give thanksgiving. And that's why the Gemara says Hanukkah is celebrated both by Hallel, both by spontaneous notion and or the enjoyment, the song, and by a reflective, by giving thanksgiving to what happened. Now, what are we thanking God for? I know this is a funny question. Okay, so let's take a look at Hanisim if you have it in front of you, and your Siddur that I didn't even share a screen. Everybody can look in the Siddur. Famously, what's missing in Hanisim? What's not mentioned in Hanisim? In other words, what's not mentioned?
God's name.
Oh, God's name. Okay, that's interesting because we know it's not mentioned in the Megillah. And that's an interesting comment. That doesn't not surprising. It's kind of like saying Rifa'enu. God's name is mentioned, kind of, when we say Hatoshim Chalachana Elohodot. We don't say Hanisim as a standalone prayer. Not in Birchan Hamazon and not in Shmon Esrei. Like we say Rifa'enu. We said Behodah. In other words, what do we call that bracha? Hoda'ah, right? Modim. We give thanks. So we say Hanisim as part of Hodah. So it's nice to say Rafeinu Hashem and Ne'erpa or Atachonein Adam Dad Melamed Lanoshbina also doesn't have God's name. The Baruch Hashem Chonein Adad, it's God's name. So Hanisim, those few words don't have God's name, but it's only said in the context of saying God's name, in the context of a bracha. Yeah. So that okay. Thank you for that. But what else is missing? More. But I ask you to tell the story of Hanukkah. Does Hanisim do a good job telling the story of Hanukkah?
No, the miracle of the oil. No mention of the oil.
There's no mention of the oil. Excellent. There's no mention of the oil. We have to figure out why not. And what's missing in the Gemara? The Gemara only have a very small allusion to it. Is the miracle of in the Gemara? It's all about the oil, but they don't really talk about the war. They just said when they came in the temple and they won. They don't describe the war. The entire miracle was celebrated, entire holiday was celebrated because of the oil. No mention of the war. They're two quite different passages. So, okay, so we have to try to figure out why that's so. But let's step back. Al-Hanisim. So you notice Al-Hanisim is in the plural, right? I can say Al-Hanes, right? It's pluralized. Why is it pluralized? Why is Hanisim in the plural? So I'd say there were two miracles, right? However, whatever a miracle means, to the miracle of the oil and the miracle of the military victory. So that's Hanisim. Or you say the miracle of Hanukkah and the miracle of Jewish survival. Because the question is, what is this phrase, Bayamim Hahem Bazman Hazeh mean? It's a very strange phrase. I don't know if you ever think about it. Shasita lavotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. So first of all, how do you read it? Should it be in those bayamim hahem ubizman hazeh? In those then and now? So then it's pretty obvious. Then we thank God, Hanisim, we thank God for the miracle of Hanukkah, without getting the details, oil, war, the miracle of Hanukkah, ubizman hazeh. That we have a state of Israel, the Jewish people have survived for 4,000 years. We're thanking God for the miracles, and remember there was especially the military victory, and that has for sure Purim. There's no overt miracle. on Purim, right? That's the whole thing. Everything is hidden. And the military victory is not it's like, we call it a miracle, but it's not a suspension of everything. The oil, that's a miracle, right? So is al Hanisim bayamim ahem ubizman hazeh, in those days, one miracle, Hanukkah, and today, that we're here today to light the menorah after everything we've gone through for the last 200 years since Hanukkah happened. Unbelievable that we're here. What a miracle. Or do you say, but we don't, I think our Siddurim don't have it. For sure, the Quran that I have open now doesn't say that. It doesn't say bayamim ahem ubizman hazeh. It says bayamim ahem bizman hazeh. In those days, now, I don't know what that means. Bayamim ahem, we thank God for the miracle in those days today. So what does that mean? So I don't know if this is exactly what it means, but even if it doesn't, I think what I'm going to say is something good or whatever is worthwhile. Whether that's the meaning of Bayamim Hazeh, I don't know, but I think it could be. So we have a major problem in Hanukkah. What's the problem with Hanukkah? Our celebration of Hanukkah. The problem with Hanukkah is it makes no sense. Why does it make no sense? It makes no sense historically. Historically, it makes no sense today. Because you see, the Rambam, when he introduces Hilchot Chanukah, gives you the whole story. Rabbi Adler spoke about that last week in his first year. Why does the Rambam give you a whole history of Chanukah? But regardless of why the Rambam does that, how does the Rambam say celebrate? Why do we celebrate it? So the Rambam writes, this is in Perek Gimel of Hilchot Megillah and Chanukah. So the Rambam writes, let's see here. The Rambam writes a famous comment of the Rambam. Chazra Malchut Yisrael, the sovereignty, the kingship of the Jewish people returned, because they didn't have much time for the whole first 300 years of the Second Temple. They had very little autonomy. It was really only with Hanukkah. Yeter Amatam Shana, from the year 165 BC to 68, 70, whenever the temple was destroyed, 235 years. Yeter Amatam Shana, more than 200 years out of Churban. So we're celebrating that we had Jewish sovereignty for 235 years. That's great. That's great if you're living in the year 20 or living in 80 BC. But if you're living in 120 and you're in Yavne and you've just lost the temple, or you're living in Babylonia or Rome or Poland, what in the world is celebrating? I've said before, if, God forbid, it's like Thanksgiving weekend, right? If God forbid America would cease to exist, what would happen on July the 4th? It'd be a day of mourning. Hanukkah should be Tisha B'Av. Hanukkah should be Tisha B'Av. Because the whole point of Hanukkah is we rededicated the temple and we went to war. Well, that was all taken away in the year 70. And why are we still celebrating the holiday of Hanukkah? And I'll just add one thing, and then I want to hear what people have to say, perhaps. The Gemara is well aware of this problem. What I quoted in the Gemara, my Hanukkah, that comes from Megillat Ta'anit. You've heard of Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit is the scroll, a Megillah, that listed as some 35 holidays where you were not allowed to fast or give eulogies, because they were, great things happened to Jewish people. Some guy gave $1 million to the temple and they refurbished it. Right, so it's a very happy day. We're going to celebrate every year. Or they won some military battle. Something happened to make us very happy. And therefore you can't give a eulogy, like you can't on Rosh Chodesh, right? That's we today, even outside of the temple, you can't give eulogies in theory. On Rosh Chodesh, you can't fast on Rosh Chodesh. So you have Megillat Ta'anit, and the Gemara says, yeah, but in the year 70, that's all gone. In the year 70, Megillat Ta'anit is gone. Makes no sense. What we should be mourning, with the exception of Hanukkah and Purim. For some reason, the Gemara doesn't explain why. The Gemara just says everything in the Megillat Ta'anit is batel. We're going to keep Hanukkah and Purim. But why? Does anybody have any ideas? In other words, my point, Hanukkah should not be celebrated anymore. Maybe in 1948, they could have recreated Hanukkah. Okay, we'll say there. But why do we still have Hanukkah? Well, we're celebrating the dedication of the temple. We should be mourning. Why don't we need the dedication of the temple? We don't have a temple. We're dedicating the sovereignty of the Jewish people. What are you talking about? We're in exile. Okay, maybe for our generation, thank God, that question isn't quite as strong. But you understand. Anybody want to say something?
I think the time itself, this period of time, the 8 days, God's divine presence shines greater. And so the time
Today?
itself has power over
But
over
okay, I don't know from sort of Kabbalistic notions or divine presence. I don't know any of that stuff. It's beyond me. But what I'm saying is, this might be true, and some I'm sure it's true Kabbalistically, whatever. But the reason in all our sources we celebrate is either the miracle of the oil, or either the miracle of the war, or the Rambam sort of takes that and says Jewish sovereignty. That to the Rambam is the main point. But none of that existed after the year 70. That was all destroyed.
How about Jewish survival?
Temple. I'm sorry?
How about Jewish survival?
So yeah, okay. So why not on Pesach? Celebrate Jewish survival on Pesach. I mean,
you're asking why should we celebrate Hanukkah now?
Hanukkah should have been abolished with the rest. The Gemara already said we had all these holidays. They were abolished. But in other words, the rabbis they were aware of the problem, and they consciously decided, there are 33 holidays we used to have. Throw them out. They're not in. We don't even know if they are. I mean, I don't think we have a complete version of Megillat Tanit. I'm not expert enough in the area. I think we have bits and pieces. I don't think we have the complete manuscript of Megillat Tanit. We don't even know what these holidays are. The rabbi said, yeah, but we're still going to keep Hanukkah. Why? So I think the answer is simple but powerful.
My understanding was that a lot of this was the victory over Greek culture. And that would have been something that would have been very important to Chazal. And it was actually Jews fighting Jews.
Yeah, okay, so that's very interesting.
Where it was a civil war as much as fighting those nasty Greeks. And so I think that must have been very important to Chazal that tradition in the temple remains.
Yeah, but I don't think the rabbis would have made a holiday for that. In other words, a civil war. In other words, when you look in the Rambam, you look in the Gemara, you look in Hanisim, there's no mention Jews were fighting Jews. And we know historically that was true, that many of the Jews wanted to Hellenize. But that's not why we Hanukkah. And then, in other words, all the reasons given in legal sources for Hanukkah have nothing. The Jews are fighting Jews, and therefore what? And therefore we defeat. First of all, we didn't defeat Hellenism. Secondly, do we want to defeat Hellenism? That's a whole other sheer. In other words, the Rambam, what is the Rambam? The Rambam says, by Sheni, they did all these laws, right? They did all these terrible things. The Greeks. Who was the greatest exponent of Greek culture and the Jewish tradition? Is the Rambam. We love Greece. Okay, I'll tell you, right? Greece brought logic and art and philosophy and democracy. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, they brought so much to the world that we've incorporated in our religion. And the Rambam loved it. He wrote a whole book, How to Reconcile. So it's really a little beyond where I want to go totally, but I'll tell you, I'll tell you a cute story. I don't know if I've ever mentioned before. When I was in Israel, right after we got married, we spent a year learning in Israel. I was learning in Beit Morashah. Some people have heard of it. It was sort of new at the time. Beni Shalom, a very interesting place, sort of for Hesder graduates. I mean, I was the only person not living in Israel. There were about 35 people, about 30 Israelis, maybe 5 or 6 Americans, but all the other Americans had made Aliyah. I was the only one who hadn't made Aliyah. No, they let me in. So I learned for a year. It was mainly for Hesder graduates who were going to go into Chinuch, and it was a sort of combination, a little bit academic. Yeshiva Rav Shagar, who's become very popular, gave the Gemara shir. He taught Gemara. I did learn Beitza with Rav Shagar that year. That's when I went into to Danny Sperber and Yisrael Tashma, some of the great scholars in Jewish studies. So one of our teachers was, maybe I shouldn't, I guess I can say his name, Chagi Ben Artzi. He's Bibi's, brother-in-law. He makes Bibi look like a leftist, a real left. Anyways, so he told us a story. He's about Tshuva. And he told us a story that him and his brother apparently was a professor of math at Hebrew University. And they were both on sabbatical in the 80s in the United States. And he said his brother never lit Hanukkah candles. His brother hated Hanukkah. We know Hanukkah is very popular in Israel because the Maccabees defeating the war. But this brother said, Hanukkah is terrible. The wrong side won. The religious fundamentalists won. I wish the Greeks would have won. The Greeks got culture and all these wonderful things. And he refused to light Hanukkah candles. That's what he said. His brother, they're in America together. Ronald Reagan is the president of the United States. And Ronald Reagan is holding a press conference, whatever, December time. And there's, I guess, a Christmas tree behind him and the menorah behind him, Hanukkah, and he says, wants to wish everybody a happy holidays, and our Jewish, citizens, are celebrating Hanukkah, and Hanukkah celebrates religious freedom and minority rights and standing up for what you believe. It's a beautiful speech on Hanukkah. Like, now his brother could light Hanukkah candles. If Ronald Reagan Paskin that Hanukkah is a wonderful holiday to celebrate freedom and religion, I mean, we all know that. When the Goyim tell us what they're doing is nice, it's nice. So, but there's something to what he was saying. Like always, whenever our critics say something, they have a point. We don't reject Greek. I mean, maybe some people do, but the people, I'm sure, anybody who will come to my class is not going to totally reject the modern world in Greek culture. So that's a fascinating question about Hanukkah. What were we fighting? In other words, so that's why you look in the sources. And the Rambam himself, who loved Greek culture, or parts of it, the Rambam himself, Pashtuya, they raped us. They said, Pashtuya, they stole our money. They sexually assaulted our daughters. And they destroyed they messed up the temple. Okay, that we're going to fight. But he's not saying we're going to fight, Plato. That's not what he's saying, because the Rambam loved Plato. The Rambam loved this stuff. So it's very interesting. So all the reasons, according to the Rambam himself says it, black and white. We celebrate Hanukkah because for 235 years, we had sovereignty. So forget everybody else. So Mr. Rambam, why do we celebrate Hanukkah today? Makes no sense. Makes no sense. Why not everything else? So I think the answer is relatively simple. Basically, Hanukkah is the holiday of hope, right? Basically, Hanukkah. In other words, the rabbis recognize we're going to exile now. The rabbis had a feeling when Rabbi Akiva said that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach, it was like 70 years later, more or less, like 70 years from the first to the second temple. The rabbis told him, "You're crazy." They have an expression like hair will grow on the back of your hand or something. The rabbis knew this was not a short exile. You don't have to be a genius or a prophet to know Judaism had to be rebuilt. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, they had to rebuild Judaism from square one. They were not getting any temple anytime soon, right? So the Jewish people needed something. And so we discussed before Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we have things to remember the temple, the destruction, that's on Tisha B'Av. Then we have Zeichel HaMikdash to remember the glory of the temple. We take Lulav 7 days because in the temple they took the Lulav for 7 days. So what happened? That's with Lashana Acheret in another year. Possibly, for the first 235 years, what happened? They lit the menorah in the temple. There's no mitzvah to light a menorah in your house. They lit the menorah. When the temple was destroyed, so the rabbis ingeniously said, you know what? We don't have a temple. We're not going to have a temple for a long time. We'll assimilate. We'll this way. We've got to give the people something. Light always represents hope. We're going to turn your home. This is a famous idea. We all know that we're going to turn your home into a temple. So every home now is going to light the candles. Probably we don't have to light it when there's a Beit HaMikdash. L'shana acheret, in a future year, and there's no temple anymore. Now every Jew, we're recreating temples. So Hanukkah historically makes no sense anymore. All the reasons don't exist. But Hanukkah is the idea of survival of the Jewish people. And that's why the rabbis insisted. And that's why you have to sell your shirt for Jewish survival. You have to sell your shirt off the back to light the menorah. That I just see somebody find it offensive. You keep saying we shouldn't celebrate Hanukkah. I didn't say we shouldn't celebrate it. I'm wondering why we celebrate it. In other words, when I say shouldn't, I mean logically we shouldn't celebrate it. I don't mean it in practice. Of course we should celebrate Hanukkah. My question is, why did the rabbis, I'm sorry, Joseph, if I offended anybody by that, but in other words, I'm asking, why did the rabbis keep Hanukkah? I'm making the question even stronger. Hanukkah is so great that even though in theory it shouldn't be celebrated, we insisted celebrate it. Not only you have to celebrate, you have to sell the shirt off your back. No other mitzvah has this. Purim. You have to sell the shirt off your back in order to celebrate Hanukkah. Because Hanukkah is Zeicher L'Mikdash. We had to recreate the temple. That's why we wash before we eat, and that's why we put salt on our challah, because that's recreating the temple. And that leads us to another anomaly. So when I was in Beit Morashah, interesting, that story that I told you, when I was learning in Beit Morashah. So that's the first time, not the first time, the only time I heard a shiur live by Yoel Ben Nun. Yoel Ben Nun, I think, is pretty well known today, one of the experts in Tanakh. But so he gave a shir in Beit Morashah, Hanukkah time. And I maybe some of you have heard this idea, but we'll raise the question. Hanukkah is, the only holiday we celebrate in the winter, because all our holidays have agricultural motifs. As a matter of fact, in the Torah itself, the agricultural motif is greater than the historical motif. Shavuot has no historical mention in Torah. Matan Torah is not mentioned. That's, for another discussion why, but it's only agriculture. Sukkot is mentioned 7 times in the Torah. 6 are agriculture. 1 is to sit in the sukkah. Pesach is the only one that has a sort of more substantive holiday, historical referencing. But that too, of course, is agriculture. Korban HaOmer, that's about agriculture. And of course, Rosh Hashanah, we don't have a clue. It may not be agriculture, but it's nothing historical in the Bible. And Yom Kippur the Torah doesn't connect it to Chet Egel. It means connect to the general idea. But spring, growing. So our everything's got to be in the spring, summer, and the fall is towards the end. Okay, Hanukkah is the only holiday in the winter, and secondly, Hanukkah is, of course, the only holiday in the second half of the month. Right? I'll know we're classically because I teach in chat. So I'm teaching a grade 10 class in rabbinics. And the first unit that we're doing this year is the calendar. And we're doing a quad semester. It worked out very well. Hanukkah ties in. So the whole Jewish lunar solar calendar, Jewish calendar, discussing. So I, brought this up, of course, right? You ask them, when's Pesach? 15th of the month. When's Sukkot? The 15th of the month. When's Purim? The 14th and the 15th of them. When is Tu B'Shvat? The 15th of them. When's Tu B'Av? The 15th of the month. When's Rosh Hashanah? The 1st. So Shavuot is the 6th to 10th. Everything either mamash on the full moon or when the moon is growing. There's no holiday in the second half of the month. Only Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is, of course, the darkest time of the year from a lunar perspective and from a solar perspective. Forget Hanukkah. Now you understand why we have a holiday of lights. In other words, they have festival of light. And we know all cultures have festivals of lights. But Hanukkah is the darkest time of the year from a solar point of view. Obviously, it's the 8 hours of daylight, whatever, 8.5 hours of daylight. And the moon, you're not going to be able to see the moon, 25th of Kislev. So that's in the darkest moment. And of course, now take it, expand it. This is the Jewish history. We were entering the darkest period of Jewish history, 2,000 pogroms culminating in the Holocaust. Now, after the Holocaust, we're sort of coming back, but crusades and expulsions and pogroms, etc. So in the darkest time of the year, the middle of December and then the end of the month. So no, Jewish people are going to survive. We're going to light the Hanukkah candles, but Hanukkah as the historical reason really doesn't make so much sense anymore, right? And that's what it means. Bayamim Haim Bazman Hazeh. I don't know if that's what Bayamim Haim Bazman Hazeh means, but it could be. I think what I said is correct, even if you don't attach it. But Bayamim Haim, in other words, the purpose of Hanukkah, it happened then, but Hanukkah is really about now, because what happened then doesn't make sense anymore. It's because Hanukkah allowed us. And the truth of the matter is, this idea is true about all our holidays. We don't, I'm going to say it in harsh terms, please, but the Torah couldn't care less about history. It's not exactly true. Zechor Yemot Olam, of course, the study of history is very important. Obviously, I believe history is very important. We learn a lot, and the Torah believes it. Zechor Yemot Olam, Binu Shnot Dor V'Dor, Shal Avicha V'Yagetcha, right? Ask the previous generation. But whether this historic fact, the Torah's interest is not history. The Torah's interest is, we don't study history for history's sake. We study for moral, right? To learn the lessons, so we don't make the mistakes. But what do we do in every holiday? We don't sell it. I don't say we don't care that our ancestors left Egypt 3,500 years ago. We don't care that much. What connection do you have with some slave from Egypt of 3,300 years ago? You don't fulfill Pesach properly unless you are experiencing the change from slavery. We relive, we don't celebrate holidays for historical reasons. We celebrate holidays for experiential reasons. We have to and then we have to learn the lessons. Why did God take us out of Egypt? Us, today, to remember how to treat slaves, remember how to treat other people. Don't make them work on Shabbos, don't enslave them, right? Kiger Yitim. The most common refrain in in the Torah. You were slaves in Egypt. Be kind to strangers. Know how to treat them, right? So we're not celebrating Pesach so much because our ancestors of Egypt. Yeah, that was the impetus, but we're really celebrating Pesach. If you don't feel you're leaving Egypt, Pesach is lost most of its meaning. And we do that on every holiday. We go out into the sukkah. We have to physically do the holiday. We learn Torah on Shavuot. In other words, everything we do for the holidays is done as a re-experiencing that notion. So it's most pronounced in Hanukkah, because Hanukkah's lost all its meaning without something today hope. And then I'll just let me quickly show you the famous Gemara that you know what, maybe I'll save that Gemara till next week. Well, I guess we have more to discuss on Hanukkah, hopefully. But let me share another just interesting Gemara that talks about what are we celebrating now. Back military victories, the oil. So I think there's a. Just let me find it here. I think getting in the way. Mishnah Shabbat. Okay. All right. So maybe I'll start with this. I'm sure many people know the Beit Yosef's famous question: why is Hanukkah 8 days? It should be only 7 days, because the miracle of the oil. They had oil for 1 day. So the miracle's only 7 days. I mean, that question assumes that the whole purpose of Hanukkah is the miracle of the oil. But be that as it may, that's the famous question of the Beit Yosef, of Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. But he asked it in his commentary on the Torah, not in the Shulchan Aruch. And I think Rabbi Adler quoted there some book, Ner LaElef, 1,000 answers people give. Obviously, they're not 1,000 answers. People make up stuff, all kinds of cute little answers. So one of the classic answers is that one of the days was for the war. I think the Pri Chadash says that I have to check that 7 days for the oil and 1 day for the war. And other people say, no, we don't celebrate wars. Right? We haven't yet answered the question why Hanisim focuses on the war and the Gemara focuses on the oil. I don't think we're going to get there in today's class. I don't think. But so that's one question: do we celebrate the military victories? So I just want to point, I think, an interesting Gemara that sheds light on this. It's a Gemara it's a Mishnah in Shabbat, in Masechet Shabbat. I'm sure those who've learned Shabbat know that most of the Masechet talks about carrying. It's very, even though we have a Masechet Eruvin, Yitzir Hashav Shtayim Shemar, but that's a whole for another time. Why Shabbat? We don't get to the 39 Melachot till the 7th chapter. Carrying was what we call a Malacha Gura. Even today, carrying, it's not the same thing. It's not like a fire. It's not like mowing the lawn, cooking. It's different. And of course, thank God, we all live, I assume most of us live in a city with an Eruv. Today, people won't move to a city without an Eruv. So we forgot about carrying, right? So the first 6 chapters, first much, and then afterwards too, so much of it talks about carrying. So then the question is, so how do you get dressed? Okay, so you can get dressed. That's not carrying. That's wearing clothes. Where do you draw the line, right? I'm sure you all know people without an Eruv, they won't wear gloves. It can be 20 below zero. That's carrying. What a plastic on a rain hat? You get all these, a watch over Moshe Tshuva. Can you wear a watch without an Eruv? Is that carrying or is that your clothing? So these are big debates. So you have let's go to the Mishnah and see what the Mishnah debates about, or one of the things, not the only thing. A man shouldn't go out with a sword, a bow, right? I'm not talking about in the Israeli army for Pikuach Nefesh. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about he came back a World War II hero, and they have a parade, and he comes in the military uniform, the military officers, and he's wearing all his equipment and all this extra stuff that normally you wouldn't dress like that. The Lo Baromach and his shield, his spear. Ve'im yatsa chayav chatat. He violated the Shabbat accidentally. He has to bring a korban. He has to bring a sin offering. He sinned. Rabbi Elez says, no. Tachshitim. What do you mean? Sin. No, this is beautiful. These are beautiful clothes, ornaments. A tachshit, like a woman can wear jewelry, right? And whatever, right? It's a beauty, or a man, whatever, man, wear jewelry. It's a tachshit. This is his clothes. This is the beauty. Dressed up in military outfit. This is terrible. Anything to do with the military is lignai, is bad. How do you translate kanai? Here, reprehensible, right? Shenamar v'kitvu charatim litim mechanoteim lemazmeirot lo yisagoyel goy charev lo yimadu ad milchama. We hate war. Sometimes you have to fight war, but we're not going to celebrate. A person who goes out in his military uniform on Shabbat has to bring a sin offering. If you're going to fight in a war, Rahman al-Islam, God forbid, you have to fight in a war sometimes. It's terrible. But okay, so you wear your military uniform. And we know that in today's societies, most societies, they that's beautiful, the military uniform. So that machloket exists. So I think in a certain sense, that's and I'll end with this sort of point. Al Hanisim, right? Can we celebrate the war? So you're going to tell me, well, it says, Al Hanisim, Al Furqam, Al Grup, Al Shavuot, Al Milchamot. We thank God for the wars, the victory in the war. So here again, you see what one letter can make all the difference. By the way, last week I sent out a Dvar Torah. So I'm glad that most people don't read what I write so much. So only one person picked up on this mistake. It was a terrible mistake, and I didn't even do it. But I did. It was I get people to edit it a little bit to read it, and I guess I read over what they edit. But so I was writing about. I was writing about Moshe's anger. So I wrote that Moshe displayed anger when he killed the Egyptian hitting the Jew. So the person we're reading over put a comma when he was hitting the Egyptian, when he killed the Jew, like a comma. So one person, Ari Zivatovsky, who's taught for us before, or whatever, he sends me an email. He says, "Jay, where did Moshe kill a Jew? What are you talking about?" Like, his anger. And I was writing the Egyptian who was killing the Jew, but they put a comma in. So I looked at it. I didn't know what he was talking about. So I went to look at the other comma and said, oh my God, look at the difference what a comma can make. A misplaced comma can change everything. So I wrote him back. And of course he said, oh yeah, I didn't realize. Of course, put the comma in the wrong place, but that's it. So luckily nobody else read it, so you didn't notice. And if you read it, take out the comma. I think we went in to fix it. Okay. So here we have the same thing. Avav. Yes, avav or no avav? Who cares, avav? Yeah. Do we say al hanisim or ve al hanisim? Right? That's a debate. I see here the Quran has al without the vav. I see some of the comments, they say for sure with the vav. It's part of modim. Like somebody asked, there's no God now. I said it is. It's part of the bracha voda. It's not like modim anachnu lach me'olam kivinu lach al hanisi. It's ve'alani. It's a continuation. Whatever. So the question is. I was reading some of the commentaries discussed. Do you say Ba'al HaMilchamot? Do you say Al Hanisim, V'yala Furqam, V'yala Gurat, V'yala Chuat, V'yala Milchamot? That's how we sing it, V'yala Milchamot, with the Bab. Or do you say Al Hanisim, V'yala Furqam, V'yala Gurat, V'yala Chuat, Al HaMilchamot? What's the difference? I know it sounds ridiculous, whatever. What's the difference? Are we thanking God for the wars, their victories in wars, or no? It's Ba'al HaChuat, Al HaMilchamot. It's from being safe from the war. In other words, sometimes we had to fight it. We don't have an independent thanking God for a war. The Tshuah happened to come through a war. In other words, that was unfortunate, but the Tshuah had to come through a war. Al Hanisim. So that's what I say. You should not say it with a vav. That's what some of the commentaries say. It should be Ba'al HaTshuot Al HaMilchamot. It's the Tshuot that are on the Milchamot. It's not Al HaTshuot 1 and Al HaMilchamot 2. That's again, a little vav can make all the difference in the world. Okay, if you allow me, unless you tell me you don't want, I think we'll continue. There's more discussing Al Hanisim, and we didn't really get into the actual like text. So it's not as much, I don't think quite as much to discuss there, but there's more. I do want to show you the Gemara and in Avodah Zarah, very parallel Gemara, and we can discuss other aspects of Hanukkah, please God, next week. But let's just do a quick review. So we discussed Al Hanisim is separate from Yalav Yava, the biblical holidays and the rabbinic holidays. And the rabbinic holidays need Persumei Nisa. They're not known. We have to publicize them. We don't have to publicize like Pesach. It's in the Bible. So, and when something is pursuing this, you got to sell the shirt off your back. And Hanukkah and Purim go together, and the Rambam even unites them very much together. Then we discussed that if there's no musaf, you don't have to repeat it. Al Hanisim is important, but it's not like Yalav Yavo. Yalav Yavo, you forget Yalav Yavo, except Mariv the Rosh Chodesh, but you forget Yalav Yavo, then you have to repeat, not Al Hanisim. So the Tosefta gave this weird reason. I would say maybe it's the Tosefta said because there's no musaf. So what's the connection? So we thought maybe connected to in the temple. Musaf is only in the temple, only in the biblical holidays, celebrating the temple, and prayer emanates from the temple. The temple is the place of prayer. So prayer is on a higher level. Whenever there's a korban, so the whole day of prayer is different. You don't have that on the Hanukkah Purim. No. Okay, then we discussed the Gemara, the source of Hanisim that Rashi says from the story, my Hanukkah, what's Hanukkah? Which you have to do that story a little bit more. So after the Shana Acheret, in the future year, which we're defining as after the temple was destroyed, they made it Behalel Ubahodah, their song. There's joy, rejoicing. That's a little bit different from Hodah, Thanksgiving, which is a more reflective notion. We discussed it, Al-Hanisim in plural. What are we thanking for? The oil and the war. And Al-Hanisim leaves, this focuses very much on the war and almost nothing on the oil. And of course, the Gemara is the exact reverse. And that's the whole question. Military fatigues, is that a good thing or a terrible thing? And I'll just, okay, I think that's pretty much, and of course, the main point there was why Hanukkah is still a holiday. The reasons for Hanukkah given by the Rambam and given by the Gemara, forget the Hellenism and all that, which or the Civil War, we wouldn't make a holiday for that. The reasons given do no longer applied after the destruction of the temple, and yet the rabbis made Hanukkah so important, we had to sell the shirt because it's hope and despair. And that's why it's hope in the darkest time of the year, in the darkest times of Jewish history, the lunar darkness and the solar darkness. We still have to light, so much so we have to light the Hanukkah candles because we're still here. It's not, it could be miracles then and miracles now, but the miracle then is the continuation of Hanukkah is to give people hope. And that's what light is always a symbol of hope. Light is a symbol of sharing and everything. So that's why we have, that's why it's the only holiday that's not in Mamash in the middle of the month or the first half of the month. Okay, that's pretty much, let's see, anybody else on their comments? I think it's
Rabbi Kelman, thank you so much. It was beautiful. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much. Please. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me just take a quick look. I see there are a couple of comments. So I hope, Joseph, I answered your point correctly. It is true. I do have a little bit of a style where I sometimes a little bit sharp. But those who know me over time get to understand. Of course, we have to keep Hanukkah, but it doesn't. The logic of it seems difficult. Our Jewish homes keep us. Hanukkah represents, as does Purim, acting in history. Of course, that's what we're saying. God continues. That's the point. Even then and then. So that's either Hanukkah continues today, or we thank God there are miracles then and there are miracles today. We have a state of Israel. We're here. That's the biggest miracle, that the Jewish people is here. Passover is more important than Shavuot. Well, Passover is a cry for redemption again. I'm not sure that Passover is more important than Shavuos. The Korban Pesach is Korban Pesach, but that's not. That's really unconnected. You look in the Torah. There's Pesach and Chag HaMatzot. Yeah, of course. Yeah, Passover is more. On a certain level, more important. The formation of that. I don't know if you're celebrating Shavuos as Matan Torah. To have Pesach without Shavuos is sort of meaningless. Of course, in the Torah, that's not when we celebrate Shavuot. But all right, that's just an interesting point. Okay, a series on the Jewish calendar would be great. Somebody wrote me. So that may actually happen a few classes. I see are in Zmanim. Okay, Alat Shuat B'Milchamot. So Tov, are you saying that's what it should say? It's Alat Shuat B'Milchamot. I don't know. Maybe. I'm my grammar.
If you explain Alat Shuot Ala Milchamot, doesn't make sense.
Okay. So maybe that's why we do have the Vav. Our standard editions do have the Vav. And even though the rabbis say it's Ganai, it's terrible military fatigues, no, we thank God. And like I say, some people say we celebrate the 8th day or the first day, 7 days for the oil, 1 day for the military. We do celebrate. Tova, thank you. We do celebrate on Purim. They killed 75,000 people in Persia, in Shushan, whatever. So I don't. That's a fascinating. That's a more also. Yeah, I don't know how we do that. Yeah, in the context of 2 millennia of every home, the place for worship, what impact the present time when people in Israel have wanted to rebuild temple in Jerusalem once again have sacrificed. Yeah, so that's a major question. We'll have to discuss it maybe another time. Now's not the time. Rebuilding the temple, this already started in the 1800s. the Binyan Sion, the Binyan Sion, one of a top student of Rabbi Kiva. In other words, he's a major leaguer. He's in the major leagues of great rabbinic figures. Binyan Sion, that's Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, the teacher of Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, called his responsive book Binyan Sion, the building of Zion, because the first, I think, 4 questions of his response deal with reinstituting sacrifices, rebuilding Beit HaMikdash. There was a movement. We'll get Rothschild and Montefiore to buy the Temple Mount from the people in Ebite, people not to realize, we'll build the temple there. What's the big deal? The Muslims will be happy. So there was serious talk, and then there was very serious talk about the Korban Pesach. That's much easier to bring a Paschal lamb today. I don't know if anybody went to see the Shomanim or whatever they're called. They still bring the Korban Pesach right near Shechem in the days when you could travel. When I was first in yeshiva, when people would travel these places. So we went one year to watch them do the Korban Pesach. There is a discussion. Obviously, that hasn't been accepted for all kinds of reasons, but that's what the Binyan Sion discusses in a serious response. So there is much to discuss about rebuilding. Like I've said many times, I think if you took as a survey in your typical shul, I don't think so many people are craving for the reinstitution of sacrifices, but that's a whole different discussion. Not for now. I don't want to raise a can of worms at 10:05 and get other people mad at me. But anyways, there's much. It's not clear. Repeat Al Nisim forgotten. No, you do not repeat Al Nisim if forgotten, no matter what. I was just wondering, but the reason is a very interesting reason. Not in benching and not in tefillah. Okay, please God, we'll see you all next week. And next week we start Menachem Liftach shir at 11:15. We will have a special shir by Alex Maggi, who emailed me this week on the normal. It's going to be Wednesday at 1:30 for what would be the Haftorah of Miketz, but it almost never is. And that's Haftorah of Miketz is a story of Shlomo HaMelech and the 2 women and cutting the baby in half. It's only when Miketz is not Shabbos Chanukah, which is like once in 85 years. It's like almost never happened. But that is the official Haftorah. So he's going to give a shir. He's got smicha from YE. He's a chat student who I did not teach. He was in the North Branch, for those who know what I'm talking about, when they had 2 branches, and he has a Harvard PhD. He's a Harvard Law School graduate with smicha, and he's going to give a shir this week, Wednesday, 1:30. We'll send out the details on the story and the legal perspectives of that story in Shlomo Melech. And then we'll have but otherwise all the regular shirim, the Parsha shir this week by Leah Silver, and I better go because it's getting late. Okay, have a wonderful Shabbat, a wonderful first few days of all of Hanukkah, and hope to see you.
Shabbat Shalom and Hanukkah
Shabbat Shalom
Sameach.
and Hanukkah Sameach. All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. Have a good Shabbat.
Bye-bye. Yeah, bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.